I had concerns that I was worried, that would I be isolated? Would I encounter really hostile people like Charlene and Hamilton did? And I have to say, while you've found spatterings of people, but for the most part, people just let you survive. You go do your way, they went their way. One of the things I did find that we weren't allowed to join their organizations per se. We weren't allowed, in class, I was the only one in my class. Every class I've taken, I was the only Black in my class, never had any classes with other Blacks. I never had a Black professor. Some of those things. So, I got to meet people by actually going to the student center. And that's where I would see other people that look like me that I could then gravitate to, get to know, and then form alliances to do things. And that's what happened. That's how we survived on campus. We formed our own organizations. We did, our things together. We just learned to work together within the environment that we had. I refused to go to football games. I didn't get involved in that. I was happy with the basketball team. Why? Because the basketball coach would allow Black students to actually play. Football didn't allow them to play until it became popular. So, I still to this day don't go to a Georgia football game.
First stage, the pioneers, the initiators, the explosive part of the Southern Freedom Movement, which people call Civil Rights Movement, has come to a close. The battle leaves the community, and it relocate to college campuses after Selma in 1965 and Bloody Lounge of summer 1965. So that's the environment in which I attend at the University of Georgia. The second stage is one movement, the early pioneers, the desegregators, Brother Hamilton, Dr. Hamilton Home, Charlene Hunter Gault, and many others. But there was then another dynamic. How do we organize the experience? How do we make it relevant? How do we make the quality of the experience rather than just being a number, rather than just being a dark, invisible man or woman on campus? How do we become a living presence at the University of Georgia?
I served as a president at one time of the Black Student Union. I was an organizer, on campus of various activist activities. I was involved in the marches and the protests in 1970 when Athens went up kind of in flames, if you want to call it. And that was over the issue of involving desegregation of schools and a lot of other aspects of not only Athens, but the University of Georgia's response to things like the war in Vietnam, the situation that African Americans dealt with at that time in the country. So yes, I was very involved in quite a few activities. And of course, at that time, understanding your history was very important. That's why we pushed for the Black Studies programs and there to be incorporated at the University of Georgia, Black Studies classes. And I remember the first professor that they had to teach Black Studies at the University of Georgia, Professor Foley, at that time. And so, understanding your history was very important. Understanding the political framework of this country was very important. Understanding government and its relations to its people was very important. So it was kind of like a natural for me, since I found myself caught up in that movement during that time, to also want to be a history and political science major. The fledgling organization called the Black Student Union that we had at that time, we made demands upon the administration. We had, like impromptu sit-ins at the president's office, and we made ourselves, known. And of course, we refused to be invisible. I mean, we wanted to be seen, acknowledged, and we wanted to be responded to. And so that's what we did. That's how it started. And of course, it developed into something more structural over the years. But initially, it was kind of like demands being made that had to be met. The administration was kind of like touch and go, but at the same time, we had certain deans at that time, Dean Russell and a couple others. I remember Dean Tate. They were very sensitive to what was going on nationwide, and that was also affecting the University of Georgia. And I would say, they did certain things to placate. They did some, less than wholehearted type efforts, but they were trying, but the effort fell very short.
Georgia at the time was, Georgia at the time. Georgia, the university was Georgia, the state, so the good old boys were there, and, they enjoyed heckling and throwing things at African-American students as they walked down the street. I mean, it was overt nonsense. There was some sort of exit exam that you had to take that a lot of the Black students were failing, and they were failing that exam not because they didn't have the knowledge or the education, but the questions were socioeconomically inappropriate for someone who hadn't had that experience. There are folks that are failing here for a whole lot of reasons. One, they don't want to be here and they don't feel welcome, and it's hard to thrive, let alone survive in that kind of environment. Number two, you've got folks that have expectations of you from the viewpoint of an Anglo-Saxon, and I am not that, or you have students that are not that. So they cannot understand your reference point because it is not theirs. But when you come to something from this standpoint and this standpoint, and there's no roads for that process to meet in the middle, you end up with folks that are on two sides of the divide all the time. And that's, that correcting that divide requires some really hard work. And I don't think that is the work that minorities need to do, although we've always been given the responsibility to do that work.
Well, I think for me, the incidents were limited to probably some individualized things. There was at least one particular fraternity, a white fraternity, that would celebrate the Old South, and it was widely known that they would, of course, dress up in Confederate garb. They would seek out, and I guess they paid them, I don't know, little African-American youngsters in the community to ride these floats, and, sort of in a celebration of the Confederacy. That was clearly an issue for us. I remember when I was a freshman, I believe we were playing basketball, some of my friends, and we actually had an encounter with the UGA Police Department that I would not describe as positive when we were contacted and asked to show ID, essentially that we were, that it was okay for us to be playing basketball there. That was something that kind of stands out, particularly since I later became a UGA police officer. And I think that I actually made a complaint in that regard about that. I don't really know how that got resolved. There was certainly no other reason for us to be in a gymnasium full of individuals. There was certainly no other reason that I could have seen for us to have been contacted in that regard. So there was an issue, right? And we addressed that and we dealt with it. But that clearly was not the vast majority of my experience at UGA. And I can't speak to others. As a general matter, again, I enjoyed my tenure at the University of Georgia, and would, if I had to pick one of two boxes about whether relationships and things like that were positive or negative, I would say overall, I mean, they were positive, save for some incidents that, again, we spoke to and addressed.
And I had one experience in the English department that was a life lesson, and it wasn't pleasant. It was taking my major classes. I had a professor who I would raise my hand to answer questions, and she would ignore me. And I was the only African American in my class. I would get C's on my papers, didn't understand it because I had not gotten anything less than a B on a paper and had gotten all A's in my classes. So I went to talk to her, and what she said to me was, Ms. Davis, your people tend to not do well in English. Ma'am, I exempted a freshman English class. I, passed the AP English course. I said, and I haven't made anything less than an A at this point. And she said, I'm sorry, but the best thing that you can hope to get from me is a C. That was my first, just like in your face racism, right? I was hurt and I knew I was going to get a C. And that's my only C in my major. And every time I look at my transcript and see it, I'm angry all over again. But the good news is that going back to her classroom, I thought I was going to shrink in that place because I knew I wasn't going to get any love from her. But one day I was so angry, I kept raising my hand. I didn't stop raising my hand. They asked, where did I think a passage from a book we were reading came from? And I yelled out, it's the book of Ruth in the Bible. Because I spent, growing up in the South, we spent a lot of time in church. And she looked around the class and she says, doesn't anybody know the answer to that question? And surprisingly enough, my classmate said she answered the question. Did you not hear her? She was raising her hand. She yelled it. She said, well, since nobody knows, the answer is the book of Ruth in the Bible. And I was so demoralized, so horrified. And I refused to let her see my tears. And I walked out of the classroom after it was over. And some students came to me and they apologized. They said, we're so sorry that happened to you. We're sorry that she did that to you. We see what she's doing. I learned to just go in class. Don't sit in the back row. Sit in the front row, sit as close up as you can, listen, take good notes, to rely on, like I said, my Black UGA family, for people who've taken the same classes, study together, work together so we can get out together. And that was pretty much my experience.